we start for the day. We move now into Freud in the original. We start today with Freud's first major work, Studies in Hysteria. And the first part of Studies in Hysteria is what is called Preliminary Communication. So we'll go deeper into it today. Studies in Hysteria, Freud's first major work, co-authored by Freud and Dr. Breuer, probably the only popular co-authored work by Freud. After this work, Freud wrote largely alone. Studies in Hysteria is a very important book in the history of psychoanalysis, probably the first book in psychoanalysis. It has 4 parts. First, preliminary communication. Second, cases described by Freud himself. Third is theoretical discussion. And fourth is psychotherapy of hysteria. The first part is actually a kind of abstract of the third part. So preliminary communication is put by Freud before he starts discussing cases. Obviously, all that is there in psychoanalysis has been deduced by Freud from the cases he saw. And he saw many cases, some of which he documented, some of which he did not. Some which he documented, of them, a few he presented in his writings, which is what we have. And of them, 3 are very popular. Anao, the rat man, and the wolf man. And we will go through these 3 line by line. So, studies in hysteria is in 4 parts. Preliminary communication. Second is cases. Third part is theoretical discussion. And fourth part is psychotherapy of hysteria. So let us go into studies in hysteria, preliminary communication. Now, what does preliminary communication talk about? We must remember this is before Freud developed the psychosexual model. This is also before Freud developed his model of the mind. So we see Freud searching for explanations. And when we read it in the original, we get a flavor of how he was lost and how he was searching for explanations. So the first thing that comes up is Freud was trying to heal hysteria, which nobody had an idea at that point how to heal. And some innovative group of which Freud was a part, they were using hypnosis to heal hysteria. And the first thing they came across in this hypnotic area was, okay, the mind seems to have divided in 2 parts. There is a mind of which we are conscious, and there is a part of the mind we are not conscious, and that part is not accessible in our waking state. But that part is accessible only in hypnotic trance. Memories which came up in the hypnotic trance could not come up in the waking state. And this gives rise to the first scientific foundation of the idea of the unconscious. That there is a part of the mind which is active, autonomous, creative, full of desires, fears, and everything that the conscious mind is full of, but outside of our awareness and outside of our control. But it has creativity and autonomy and power of its own. So this mind being divided into two parts comes up first when Freud tries to heal hysteria using hypnosis. While he was doing it, he realized certain things which later became uh, core principles or core facts of psychoanalysis, that there is always a first precipitating event. The first precipitating event is very important. So, as Freud was trying to heal hysteria using hypnosis, the first thing that comes to his mind is the existence of a part of the mind not accessible to us in our waking state, the unconscious. And second, there is always a traumatic event, the first precipitating event. And every event in some way later is related to this first event. And this gives rise to the concept of the tree of trauma. That somewhere there is a root, the first traumatic event, and then there is a trunk and branches and leaves. So you may have disparate symptoms, right, which develop later on, and the whole tree of trauma develops. But the tree starts with a root, and the root is usually the first traumatic events, which is the first precipitating event. So for Freud, it was very important to ask the patients, when did this difficulty start? And just before the difficulty started, what happened? Because that is where he found the roots of trauma. And this gave rise to certain things which are very important in practice. The first is case taking, that there are limits to conscious articulation, meaning there might be things patient does not want to tell. That is one thing. That can be one limitation of case history. But the second limitation is even more difficult. That is, the person can't tell what he wants to tell. That there is something in his unconscious mind. Even if he wants to be honest, he cannot be honest and say it to you because he himself does not know. And the memory becomes accessible only in hypnosis. And therefore, if hypnosis is not used, then we have to use some other technique to get into the unconscious, because by volition, man cannot access this part of the mind. And therefore, we cannot rest with what is told to us. What is told to us is a limited story. It is not the full story. And therefore, it becomes necessary to use tools like free association, which Freud later used, or get into interpretation based upon our theory. We have to see behind the scene, which means there is a conscious story told to us, and behind the scene there is an unconscious story going on. It is like a dream. That dream is what is told to us, and there is a separate story of the dream which is below the awareness, which we have to find out by dream analysis. Same we do even in case of literature and film studies, that we take the film or the literary book as the text, the conscious text which is put out in the open, and below that is a psychoanalytic story, that hidden text which we have to discover. And this is what makes psychoanalysis a Sherlock Holmes profession. It is a journey from the strange to the simple. That the dream may look completely strange, completely absurd, but there is a meaning behind it. And what we do is we impose psychoanalytic theory upon that strange data to get to the simple meaning of that data. So between the presented text, the presented symptom, the presented dream, and its interpretation lies a psychoanalytic theory. We pass the raw material through that analytic machine to have the output in terms of simple meaning. So interpretation becomes essential, free association becomes essential, because the patient is incapable of telling the full story because of repression. And therefore, the technique of psychoanalysis becomes like a telescope with which we look into the mind. So the psychoanalytic theory is to us in the area of mind what telescope is to astronomy. That you cannot see without telescope certain facts of the universe. Similarly, we cannot see inside the mind without the telescope of theory. So some critics have criticized it. One of the French critics, Sartre, he used to say, he does not believe in illusions of the world behind the scene. But in our practice every day, we know that Sartre is not correct. He is wrong. We every day see the facts behind the scene, the story behind the scene. So Freud started initially with hypnosis to get into the unconscious because it was not accessible in the waking state in any way. Later on, he realized that there are other ways through which unconscious can be known, and they are free association, dreams, slips of tongue, slips of writing, slips of hearing, all the slips. I wanted to say the other and I said the mother. Art and hypnosis. So these are the 5 areas through which the unconscious leaks out, right? Apart from the symptom. Of course, the unconscious is leaking out through the symptom. But apart from the symptom, it leaks out in this way. And these are the tools we use to know the unconscious. Now we get into the definition of hysteria as Freud and his contemporary used it. Many people wrongly believe hysteria of Freud is histrionic personality disorder of today. It is not correct. Right? First, hysteria is not a personality disorder. In Freud's time, the word hysteria was used as a category description of a range of difficulties which were idiopathic in his time. So let us see what was covered under hysteria in Freud's time. All the pains, neuralgias, anesthesias, unexplained medical going limp of some part of the body, contractures, anything that is contracting but without the spasm cannot be explained, paralysis which has no biological known cause, hysterical attacks, epilepsy like attacks, vomiting which cannot be explained, loss of appetite, anorexia which cannot be explained, convulsions which cannot be explained. At that point, a word was used, petit mal epilepsy. Uh, it may not be used any longer, but what it means is episodes of staring blankly, episodes of absences as though the person is absent. His body is in front of us, but psychologically he seems absent completely. Staring spells, disturbance of vision, biologically nothing wrong in the eye, but the vision is not clear. At times, person cannot see at all. Same is true of hearing. I personally knew a person who had no biologically known cause but had hearing difficulty. He went to so many ENT investigations, nothing came out. And the whole reason was psychological. I'll come to it in a moment. Hallucinations, everything idiopathic or of conversion nature, that all was put together under hysteria. It's almost like what used to be in DSM-4 called NOS. At a chapter level, when something cannot be put anywhere, you put it in NOS. And at a complete DSM level, when something can't be put anywhere, you put it as adjustment disorder. So it was like a parking space that when something cannot be put anywhere, where do you put it? So hysteria was like a parking space at that point. A range of difficulties. If you look at it now, many of these difficulties will go into different chapters of DSM. Right? They won't be even in the same chapter. So some will go into conversion disorder, some will go into histrionic personality disorder, uh, some will go in obsessions, some will go in food related disorders, but all of that was put together under a broad name, hysteria, right? At that point in time. So first, hysteria is not a personality disorder. Hysteria is not histrionic personality disorder of today. There are some confluences. There are some things which were covered under hysteria, which are today covered under histrionic personality disorder. And if you want to study that confluence, one can study it. But that will be a reference study. It is not what actually hysteria meant at that time. Every symptom we said, with medically unknown, according to Freud, is strictly related to the original trauma, no matter how unrelated it may seem. This is very important. The relation of the symptom to an original trauma is not always straightforward. Often it is counterintuitive, doesn't look related at all, right? And we'll know in a way how it happens so, right? Because you may not have a direct relation from a traumatic event to a symptom. You may have a very twisted relation. Let me give an example. Uh, a person who had a very difficult attachment with the mother. He went to a hospital and the mother died. And he could not take it. And thereafter, whenever somebody would say anything related to the hospital, he would develop extreme anxiety. After some time, he went on a vacation and he felt extremely anxious in a hotel. And after some time, he started feeling with every hotel. And in analysis, it came out that somebody said the word hospitality. And the word hospitality was associated with the hotel, and the hospitality was also associated with hospital. So, hotel got associated with hospitality with hospital, and that hospital with that traumatic event. Now, if you try to find out directly what does a hotel have to do with the hospital, we cannot get the direct link. One example. Second example would be example of a lady that Jung gives. That one of the psychotic uh, patients that Jung saw, she was constantly doing the stitching movements like this. And when Jung inquired, he found that she developed psychosis after she was abandoned by her lover, and her lover was a cobbler. So these movements were way of handling that loss, of denying that loss. That if I am doing the cobbler's work, which means the cobbler is here, he is not lost, and therefore I don't have to suffer that loss. It was a sophisticated way to manage that loss. So this brings us broadly into the area of the story of the symptoms. And very important is, no matter how unrelated the symptom appears to the original traumatic event, it may have undergone vicissitudes, it may have undergone detours, but it's always related to the original traumatic event. Now here you see different symptoms being converging onto a few trauma or a single trauma. So there is a convergence at work. A similar kind of convergence you see in other approaches of medicine. You see that in homeopathy, you see that also in Ayurveda. For example, let us say some person has uh, manic episodes and has arthritis. Now in allopathy, you will be sent to two different people. Arthritis will be handled by orthopedic and the mania will be handled by a psychiatrist. But in Ayurveda, both are excesses of the Vata element. Both are difficulties of the Vata thing. So the general thing will be reduce everything that you eat that promotes Vata, increase something that reduces Vata. And go for application more of oil because that reduces Vata, and they will have other range of remedies. But the idea will be in Ayurveda, you will be converging the difficulties into the three, Vata, Pitta and Kapha. So if you have 2000 difficulties elaborated in Ayurveda, ultimately they have to collapse into three. Similarly, in CBT, the three prime causes will be: I am not lovable, I am not good enough, the world is not a safe place. So, if you look at 150 problems of DSM, they will have to converge into three if you apply CBT. Similarly, if you apply Freud, then there are a few causes of pathology according to Freud, and therefore DSM has to collapse into that if you go by the Freudian approach. So, if Freud was to create a DSM, he would have a very different kind of causation. He would have a very different kind of diagnostic system. Same with Lacan. Lacan has a three parameter causation system, diagnostic system. So all difficulties have to collapse into three. We'll come to it when we look at diagnostic systems. So we have here a tree of trauma approach, that there is a root trauma, then the branch, the trunk, the branch and leaves, and often you can have a second trauma and the first can connect to the second, or the two can remain independent. The language at this time was Freud's language. It had yet to develop, but slowly it developed into a language of what was called neurosis and psychosis. If you look at DSM 1 and 2, this was the language. And DSM, you did not have personality disorders at that time. Personality disorders made an appearance from DSM 3 onwards. So, at that time, you just had two words, neurosis and psychosis. Psychosis meant a break with reality, and neurosis meant anything but the break with reality. And both, of course, had mild, moderate, and severe three categories. Neurosis had three categories, and the psychosis had three categories. So let us look at some of the uh, explorations that Freud does, from which he later deduces his principles. A girl was having a meal, and after the meal, suddenly the vomiting started, and it went on for months, and no medical cause could be found out. And later on, upon analysis, it was found that during the course of having the meal, something happened which was so disgusting. Right? And what actually came out was there was a dead insect in some food or in a bottle of water, and somebody drank it or ate it or something of that type. And that created huge disgust in her, which could not be expressed. And every time food was brought before her, that memory activated and the vomiting started. Second example that Freud gives is a girl was beside a sick bed of her father, and her hand was hanging from a chair like this. And after some time, because of this weight, this part started becoming numb. At the same time, some unconscious traumatic process happened, and that led to paralysis of the hands, contractures, and anesthesia. She tried to pray, but she could not. She would not remember her mother tongue German, but started speaking in English for months, which was not her mother tongue. And later Freud goes into details of analysis of all of this, how it is related to the early life traumatic event. A mother who wanted to keep the baby asleep, by mistake, made a cracking sound with her tongue, and the baby woke up. And this aroused a lot of anxiety, anger, and guilt. And after some time, she developed the tic of making that particular sound over and over again. And whenever the stress would increase, she would go into making of that sound. A brother was seeing the hip surgery of his younger brother, and there was a cracking sound while the surgery was being done. Suddenly, he felt a pain in his own hip, and this hysterical pain continued for 1 year. So, here you see a literal transfer, hip pain to hip pain. Or you can have very convoluted transfer, a convoluted relation between the symptom and the original event. Here, the relation is very simple. The person sees his brother's hip surgery, there is a cracking sound, he starts developing pain in his own hip. Now, when we go in details of analysis, we'll go into reasons of why this can happen. Is it because of anxiety? Is it because of fusion? Is it because of fragile narcissism? Why does this happen? Because this does not happen to everybody. Hundreds of people will see their brother's surgery and the cracking sound in the surgery. Everyone will not have this problem. So obviously there are predispositions and certain unique events happening. So this brings us to study of how the symptoms are connected to the original causes and what is the nature of these connections. So our area is one of Sherlock Holmes activity. What is presented to us seems very strange, almost absurd. And then we put that material into the analytic machine of a theory, and what comes out is a simple explanation. It is simple after the whole mystery has been unraveled. Otherwise, it's very difficult. You will get a feel of it when we do the dream analysis. That the dream looks completely absurd, but once you analyze it completely, it seems so simple. So let us look at the connections. The relationship between the symptom and the original traumatic event can be very simple. For example, hip pain to hip pain, clacking sound to clacking sound, disgust at seeing an insect being eaten converting into a vomiting symptom. But there can be linguistic associations, like church is related to the father. So somebody can have some feelings coming up the moment he sees the church, because the church is related to the church father and that is related to the actual father. So the word father is common in both places. So it can be that kind of a linguistic connection that can join the symptom and the original traumatic event. And there we have to enter into a bit of wordplay to find out the connection. So there can be a simple 1:1 connection like hip to hip, clacking sound to clacking sound, or simple linguistic connection like church brings up anger because church is related to the father and the father I have anger towards, or church brings up weeping and longing because it is connected to the father and I have weeping and longing for the father. That kind of linguistic connection. You can have more complex associations. For example, in Japan, there is a documented case. A man uh, killed his wife, cut her into pieces, put her into refrigerator, and would eat one piece of her every day. And when he was caught by the police, he said, I have not done anything wrong. I just love my wife so much that I want both of us to be one, and therefore I have cut her into pieces. So, what you are calling a crime is actually an act of love. Now, in his mind, the psychotic mind that he had, what he is doing is eating to make someone one's own. And this we see in many tribal communities. Freud writes one very famous paper, Totem and Taboo, in which we'll come to it again, where in certain tribal communities there is a custom of eating a part of somebody who is dead. And that is a way of making that person your own so that there is no separation thereafter. It's a way of dealing with the loss, it's a way of dealing with the separation, of eating somebody to make it one's own. Obviously, this is not the way a normal mind operates, but some psychotic minds can operate that way. So, what happens here? The association is complex. You are doing an act, right? You are doing an act which, at a deeper level of your mind, has a very different meaning. So, it's a very deep and complicated way the symptom is related to the original trauma. Say the original trauma is of loss. In early life, the mother is lost. So the template is developed to somehow make good this loss and never have a loss again. So if this man grows into a psychotic, he can easily eat somebody to make that somebody his own. Jung psychotic patient, that the example that I gave, was making the stitching movements, and that was her way of undoing the loss. There is a movie Silence of the Lambs in which the person, the disturbed person, he wants to make a suit from human skin, and that is his way of regaining the loss. This other movie Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock, where the son is not able to take the death of the mother and he preserves the dead body for years and talks to the dead body to deny the loss. So these are instances where the symptoms have a very difficult and complicated association to the original trauma. Any questions? So let us enter the concept of the tree of trauma. Different ways trauma can happen and be situated to create that constellation of trauma. So if we look at the entire constellation of the trauma in the unconscious, you can have various situations. Situation 1, there is one single trauma. Situation 2, there are two different traumas acting independently. Situation 3, there is first trauma, second trauma, and they are linked together, creating a more complex architecture. So here Freud talks about a single trauma, multiple trauma, and he also brings about a very important point in preliminary communication of susceptibility. Now, what is susceptibility? He says constitutionally or at a given point in time, somehow the susceptibility to trauma increases. So he talks about two different things here. One, constitutionally, some people are more susceptible to trauma, and therefore the same event, if two people are exposed to the same event, one will develop a trauma, one will not develop a trauma. And that is where the constitution comes in. And he talks of constitution in terms of susceptibility. That susceptibility, which is constitutional, is also important just as the outside event is important. So there is a constitutional susceptibility that each of us has. And this susceptibility, Freud says, is not constant, but it is dynamic. Meaning, let us say for 7 days, this is inactive. And on the 8th day, at a particular hour, say 3 to 4, for some reason that we don't know, the susceptibility increases. And at that point, if something happens, it is very easy for trauma to take place. So Freud brings in this very important element, the state that you are in, that the psychological state into which you are can be highly susceptible or have low susceptibility. Trauma, he says, is the anchor, not the catalyst. So it is not that there is some other way sickness develops and the trauma becomes a catalyst of acceleration or deacceleration. Trauma is the very cause of it. It is at the roots. And you can have single trauma, you can have multiple trauma, or you can have complex trauma, which means a series of trauma happening over time. Now, what is the way out? He says recollection of the trauma and release of the affect leads to cure. So this is very important. Recollection of the trauma. In therapy, what happens is uh, the recollection often is ideational, cognitive. and very little affect is involved in it. But often in the course of the discussion, the affect outflow starts. So, according to Freud, speaking about it, recollecting trauma is important, but more important is release of affect. So he says, only recollection without release of affect does not lead to a cure. Meaning, cognitive recollection is important but secondary. The primary thing is release of the bottled up feelings. So here Freud looks at psychological sickness essentially as bottling up of feelings. He does not look at it as a cognitive phenomena at the roots, but as a affective phenomena at the roots. And this is where Freud diverges from many people. Cognitive therapists will place emphasis on the cognitive part of the memory. Freud puts emphasis on the affective component of memory. In case of spasm, pains, hallucinations, they occur with the highest intensity for one last time and go forever. This is what happens in the process of cure, that there is a temporary aggravation of the difficulty before it goes forever. Now, this is true in many healing disciplines of healing. In homeopathy, you will call it healing aggravation. It becomes worse before it gets better for a long term. Same we see in ISTDP also, that when the method starts working, the symptoms actually deteriorate. They become more aggravated before the healing starts at a very fundamental level. So there is a temporary worsening of the situation. And Freud says the susceptibility is highest. You enter into this highly susceptible state when you go into a daydreaming kind of state, a reverie kind of state, which is very near to a state of almost auto hypnosis. And this is where we also use that kind of a relaxed state for free association in therapy. So Freud says that kind of state is very susceptible, increases susceptibility. In a way, it increases the traffic across the unconscious, between the conscious and the unconscious. And therefore, Freud makes a general statement of pathogenesis, and this is at the root of it. Not only what Freud says, it is at the root of psychoanalysis itself. Freud says hysterics suffer from reminiscences, and our goal is to convert reminiscences into remembrances. What does this mean? What it means is that what appears as a biological problem is actually psychological, and it is rooted in some past memory, reminiscences. That we are reliving in a distorted way some past traumatic event again and again and again. And that is what we are suffering from. So he says hysterics suffer from reminiscences. And what is our goal? Convert reminiscences into remembrances. Meaning, we remove the affect from the reminiscences. And when the affect is removed and the idea is made conscious, it becomes innocent like any other innocent memory. We are able to remember that traumatic event like any other memory without unsettling us, without disturbing us. So this is our goal, to convert reminiscences into remembrances. Then Freud talks about the life of memory, which is related to pathology. Right? And he says there are two kinds of memories. Memories which suffer a natural attrition, that you have seen something, you have heard something, it goes into the memory, and over a period of time, the cognitive component and the affective component both undergo a natural attrition, which means they become harmless over time on their own. The system takes care of it. So whatever the form of immune system at the mental level, that takes care of it. So there is a natural attrition of most memories. But the traumatic memories don't undergo this natural attrition. So the first characteristic of traumatic memory is it is unconscious. Second characteristic is uh, it does not undergo a natural attrition. Therefore, it is in a sense permanent. You can remember that traumatic event after 25 years, 35 years. It can keep troubling you all your life. It will not undergo a natural healing on its own. Some of them do, but most of them don't. So these traumatic memories have a characteristic. They are able to resist natural attrition. They are permanent. Third, they are far more stronger than ordinary memories which undergo natural attrition, which means if the affect which is aroused, if of a particular magnitude, it will undergo natural attrition. But if the affect which is aroused crosses a particular critical threshold, then that memory becomes permanent. It will not undergo a natural attrition and has a very long life, probably lifelong. Right? Third, he says there is nothing like an innocent forgetting. Right? Forgetting is purposeful and often pathological. Fourth, there is something which is called generation of feelings, affect. And if the affect is expressed, the problem is solved. But if the affect is not expressed, then part of it gets bottled up. Once it gets bottled up, or as he calls repressed, then it lives longer, it is immune to natural attrition, and it develops its own associations, and that root develops into a tree. So that root, which is the idea with lot of bottled up feelings, if the bottled up feelings cross a particular threshold, that whole constellation becomes immune to natural attrition. So then it not only perseveres, it remains in the unconscious, is not available to our will or conscious mind. It resists natural attrition. It develops from a root to the tree to the leaves, and it resists developing association with the healthy part of us. It's very interesting. One, the memory becomes permanent. Two, it develops. Three, it gets into associations with other pathological memories. And four, it resists association with any healthy memory. It is by will and therapy we have to do that integration. It does not happen by its own. The integration of the healthy and the unhealthy. So the
So, what
development,
governs this compartmentalization? What
uh,
develops this compartmentalization?
there are many factors actually.
Okay.
Uh, the first factor is related to one's own ego strength. Because in order to have integration, you will have to face it first to some measure. And if the ego strength is not very high, then the capacity argument itself will forbid the integration, and disassociation will be seen as a system's necessity. Second is the honesty of the person and narcissism. If one is ready to accept difficult parts of oneself, then the integration becomes easy. Third is the sincerity of wanting integration, because this needs time over weeks and months of concentrated effort, and most people cannot do it. That is third. And fourth is the tools for integration. The same effort done with tool 1 will not bring the results as with tool 2. So the tools which are there are also important. And the fifth is good, reliable, stable objects which can provide us with support and containment. This presence or absence of this, any of this, determines the rate at which integration will happen or not happen. Because disassociation, in a generic sense, is a natural condition of human mind, what often we harshly call hypocrisy.
Hmm.
that two different things are in the same person. But actually, it's a very natural thing that non-integrated, being non-integrated in the human mind is a very natural event. It's not
Is it is it similar to cognitive dissonance, or it is much deeper than that?
much deeper, much deeper. Because in cognitive dissonance, you look at one particular idea being at odds with another idea, leading to some sort of dissonance. But here, it is not only the intellectual belief or one's self image, it's also a capacity question. It's also the
Hmm.
presence of the healing other question. Uh, it's also the environment question, whether environment becomes easy or not. Like one of the videos on the channel is only you can heal me. Actually, it's taken from a James Bond movie,
Hmm.
right? Skyfall. If you remember that movie, right?
Yes, sir.
In which the towards the end, the villain says to that MI6 head, the
Right.
woman, that let us die together. Only you can heal me. Only you can stop this. So all those things, if they come together, integration becomes easy.
Right, sir.
So
Thank you, sir.
welcome. So uh, how do the secondary entities develop? So one is the root. How can this traumatic event develop? One is the root becomes bigger. Second, root grows into a tree, a very complex architecture. The tree can grow into a second tree, or root can connect to a second root, creating a constellation of the tree of trauma. And lastly, Freud says that the hysteria determining memories are not available to waking consciousness, but they are fresh as though they happened yesterday when we access them through hypnosis. Meaning, in the unconscious mind, they are extremely fresh, which means not only they don't undergo attrition, they also don't lose their freshness. Huh, Dr. Mukherjee?
Sir, I wanted to know, so if there are multiple traumas, you can have multiple trees which connect with each other,
Yes,
and they'll
yes,
all connect with the roots.
yeah. In
The
some
sa- the
cases, yeah. In some cases, they may not, but usually they will.
no, so the symptoms may appear to be separate,
Huh.
but the roots may be connected.
Correct. Let
Yeah.
us have an example. Let us say a person experiences early life loss. Say, let us say there is a child with constitutional high sensitivity and low ego capacity, and the mother starts working at 4 months of age. Right? She gets maternity leave of 3 months and she starts working after 3 months. And the child experiences abandonment. And the child has a very fragile constitution. So, what will happen is the first symptom which will come up will be related to uh, anxiety of loss, rage of loss, self sufficiency, and some traits of narcissistic personality disorder. Let us say it goes on, and at puberty, right, the moment the child becomes of 14, 15 years of age, he starts developing skin problem or asthmatic problem. And then he goes on, and at 35, he develops a blood pressure problem. Now, they seem so apart from each other, almost look like independently developing difficulties, but they are not. The first early life trauma of loss at 3 months of age is actually the root, and then the tree develops. And your lifestyle, your food, your rest, all of them are like fertilizer and water to the tree. They accelerate or deaccelerate, but they don't really uh, allow or deny the creation of the event.
Right, so I understood that. So that's the tree. But let's say there's another trauma and another trauma, right?
Yeah.
How would they connect at the root?
Uh, this is slightly more complex because
Yeah.
uh, the connections that we see either are root to root or symptom to symptom, or symptom of one becoming the root of the other. Right? For example, let us say there is a narcissistic personality disorder because of early life object loss, and the person is not able to adjust at the workplace, and he fights with the bosses and he is kicked out of the job. He tries 2 3 companies but will not fit anywhere, and he becomes like a rolling stone where he is looking forward to companies just for 2 years before he is found out. So many people have this kind of a rolling stone career. Now, what will happen is the uh, narcissistic personality disorder will lead to serial job losses, which in turn will lead to depression, and this depression then will lead to many other problems. Say, after some time, because of the depression, he starts addiction. So you will have that becoming this, and the addiction in turn leading to some other manic phases or whatever it leads to. So that will be the kind of situation where you will have the one original early trauma and later on. Or the second can be, let us say, the same person experiences death of the mother. Now that will be like a second root. It is not coming out of the original trauma. It's almost like a second root. That now a new tree will develop and both trees will coexist. And at some level, there will be an overlap or connection of the symptoms. And that happens more at the biological level. Right? Very easy for uh, somebody in depression to have high blood pressure or high diabetes or something of that sort.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you,
thank
sir.
you, sir.
Thank you.
In fact, if we look at any personality disorder, you will always see a tree of trauma and mostly multiple trees of trauma after the death of parents. Right? Or if somebody has faced an accident of some type, that can be a second root. Uh, Take, for example, the Gujarat earthquake. Of many people who suffered, many of them would be with personality disorders pre existing. And for them, this will be like second or third root which is taking place. Say, for example, somebody has already a personality disorder because of early life object loss, then the death of the parent, and then the earthquake. So this then becomes a third root kind of thing. Now we come to the affect dynamic. Right? Then what is the core affect dynamic? The first point is how much affect is generated. If large amount of affect is not generated, there is no question of bottling up and there is no question of pathology. If large amount of affect is generated, but it is expressed out completely, again there is no pathology. There is no bottling up and no pathology. Situation 3. Large amount of affect is generated. It cannot be expressed because reality or morality will not permit. Right? So reality and morality prohibit, cannot be expressed. So what will happen? Now the defensive system has to come in, and the affect regulation system has to work what to do with this excess affect. Affect which is generated but cannot be expressed. Take a simple example, roughly speaking. Say 10 kg of affect is generated, and reality and morality will allow only 2 kg to be expressed. So what happens to the other 8 kg? Some of it will go into sublimation by defensive action, right? Some of it can be projected out, but what is remaining has to be repressed. Now, the moment it goes beyond the capacity of the person to repress, symptoms will come in. Right? So, affect which is generated but cannot be expressed, cannot be regulated, cannot be repressed, has no other way of going but to develop symptoms. Symptoms can be of three types. You can develop only psychological symptoms, right? Like depression, anxiety, mania, whatever. You may develop biological symptoms, what we call somatization. So many people with very high aggression, they don't go into depression or uh, opposition defiance disorder or any sort of violence, they develop diabetes. So it can be somatization of affect. Or you may have both. Part of the affect will go into developing psychological symptom and part of the affect will go into developing biological symptom. Both of them will be there. The person will have depression and diabetes both. The person may have depression and blood pressure both. It's the same aggression turning in two different ways. Okay. So this is how the affect dynamic is. You have affect generation, affect expression, affect regulation, affect repression, and symptom formation. The whole series will go. Okay. This is what is called the hydraulic model of pathology, which is one of the models, not the only model of pathology. But Freud believed in it, many others believed in it. So this is what is called the hydraulic model. That you look at the psychic system in which the fluid of emotion is flowing. And when any pipeline is blocked, right, the pressure of the fluid builds up like a hydraulic system. And when the pressure buildup goes beyond a point, symptoms appear. This is what is called the hydraulic model of pathology.
So can you please repeat generation,
Yeah.
expression, regulation?
Okay. First is affect generation. Second is affect expression. Third is affect regulation. Fourth is affect repression. And fifth is symptom formation.
Symptom formation.
Symptom formation, three categories: only mind, only body, both.
Thank you, sir.
And when we say only body, usually the route is through the immune system. Right? So it will essentially lead to autoimmune sickness of some type. Usually diabetes, arthritis, psoriasis. And the way it happens will tell you a story. Right? So let us say if the effect of Oedipus complex is getting somatized, it is more likely to get into asthma, right, rather than psoriasis.
Won't it depend also on what, like when we talk about Oedipus, there are different small little uh, incidents, individual incidents happening during the Oedipus.
Ah.
If it is purely the guilt, if it is just the castration anxiety part of the Oedipus, won't that
Correct.
aspect also go on where the somatization takes place?
Correct, very correct. That we'll have to look at the elaboration of the Oedipal phenomena. So we'll go into it in two ways. First, when we study Freud, as we are doing right now, we'll quickly go over Oedipus when we study the psychosexual stages. But later on, we will do a detailed study of each mechanism. And there we'll elaborate Oedipus and just go into Oedipus for a couple of sessions. And there we'll look at the inner mechanics of the Oedipus. That you don't only have sexuality and aggression, you also have emotional object loss and guilt and shame. you also have envy, and you also have attachment patterns. Right? So that is where the full Oedipus will have to be considered. Let me get back to the example I just gave. In case of somatization of the affect out of Oedipus into asthmatic problem, right? In one way, you are enjoying the Oedipal desire. In the second way, you are punishing yourself. It's almost like a soft auto suicide.
How would you say enjoying the desire? By living out the.
The unconscious activation of that thing will create a breathing pattern very near to the breathing pattern of an erotically aroused state.
It is partly fulfillment of the desire.
Yeah. Right. For example, the frozen shoulder.
Mm.
You take as many X-rays as you want, nothing comes out. Right? And often it is because you want to hit the father and you also want to punish yourself. So this aggression and guilt,
Mm.
the aggression is here and the guilt holds it back and also gives you pain of that punishment. Of course, let me qualify that by saying I am not making a claim that all problems are of this type. I am not saying all frozen shoulders are of this type. So out of 100, 15-20% will be of this type, and when we try to explain them, all that we say applies. Now Freud comes to a second very important point of slowly he's developing the concept of the unconscious. He is now saying there is a double conscience. That there are two parts of the mind, and then he says the hypnoid states. That the state into which a person is as a normal person and the state into which the same person is when the hysteria is on is a very different state. So the hypnoid state, what we would call an altered state today, is a state which is not a normal state. It's almost like a state of hypnosis, a state of reverie, a state of expressing that which cannot be expressed in the normal state, almost a state of daydreams. Right? So he is talking of the altered state, right, called the hypnoid state. And he says hypnosis itself becomes like that hypnoid state or hysterical state. That when you take a person into hypnosis, the state into which he is, he does not remember when he comes up in the waking state. Right? Just as often he does not remember what happens in the hysterical state. Sometimes he remembers. So he says that that state of reverie, that state of daydreaming, that state which increases susceptibility to hysteria is a dispositional state, and therefore hysteria can come out of two causes. One, constitutionally you go into such states that even an ordinary event becomes traumatic. This type of hysteria he calls dispositional hysteria. Right? And the other hysteria is that constitutionally you are not weak. It is sheer intensity of the trauma in the outer world which causes problem. So he starts talking about hysteria in terms of the inner susceptibility and the strength of outer trauma. So when, yeah, please.
Can we say dispositional hysteria may be more associated with personality disordered people, whereas
Yeah.
the where the trauma is very strong, the person is not likely to have personality disorder?
Yeah, true. Let me just put it this way. The strong constitution, which is robust, right? That person is not likely to have dispositional hysteria, right? Unless in the environment something is very intense and he gets a
Yeah.
psychically acquired hysteria. But if he is susceptible, he is very sensitive. Now, this is where something comes in. Uh, when we talk in terms of the constitution, susceptibility, disposition, we substitute one unknown by another. Because then the question comes, what are the elements of constitution? So we don't know exactly, but roughly we can say something in the psychological sense that if the sensitivity is very high, if the life energy is very high, then affect generation will be very high. Going back to the 5-step model. If affect generation is very high, then comes the question of expression of the environment. If the environment allows, then the person passes through. If the environment does not allow, then emotions remain inside. And then the second question comes up, what is the regulation system like? How strong and efficient are the defenses? If they are strong, then maybe it can be projected, reflected, sublimated in some way. If they also give in, then repression comes. And once the buckets are full, the overflow will happen and the symptoms will start. So here what we'll say is, if these things are not in favor of the person, then early life trauma can do a lot of things. Situation 1, if the person has experienced 3 to 6 months of good life and then the trauma happens, more likely is a personality disorder. If the person has not experienced 3 to 5 months of a good life, psychically speaking, and the trauma happens, moving to the chapter of psychosis is more likely. Because in personality disorder, one can always put a question, why has this man not gone to psychosis? And the answer would be that somehow the core is intact. And how is the core intact? Because early life, first 3 to 6 months, he had good experiences that constituted that core. Apart from the constitution, of course, that constituted that core, and therefore the psychological processes are not as disintegrative as they would be with somebody. So there are 3 things. 1, when does the trauma happen? 2, with what intensity it happens? 3rd, what happened before the trauma happened? Did the man have a good experience? And 4th, what happened after the trauma happened? Did he have a good experience? If he has a good experience, the intensity will reduce. But if the experience is such that it adds on to the trauma, then it multiplies the whole thing. So when we look at the output of trauma, not only the constitution in terms of affect generation dynamics, affect management dynamics, right? The environment in terms of allowing expression. Of course, all of them are important, but also important is what happened 3 months prior to the trauma and what happened after the trauma for a long time. How was the over the period learning? Right? Say the Oedipal trauma happens at 4 to 5, and from 5 to 15 till puberty, 5 to 14, the experiences are very good. It will reduce to some extent the intensity of that. Right? But if the experiences are more traumatizing, then after puberty you will have a full-blown florid manifestation of symptoms. Usually OC or anxiety of some type.
So, one more point I did not follow was double conscience.
This is his way of putting in the two minds, because he has still not formulated the term unconscious. So we are before Freud coined the word, you started using the word unconscious. So it almost looks like there are two minds operating, one during the hysterical state and one otherwise. Similarly, he talks of two states, the normal state and the hypnoid state. The normal state where the immunity is high at the psychic level, and hypnoid state where the susceptibility is high. And he says the same event which happened during the hypnoid state and led to trauma, if that was to happen in a normal state, the same event would not be traumatic. So he talks about this combination of the state in which we are, the mental state, which makes us susceptible. And he says these susceptible states are near to the states of daydreaming, of reverie, of low attention. Huh.
I have a question here that on the couch, on the Freudian couch, the person undergoing the therapy is while having free association and talking, going, visiting back to the traumatic states. Is that person in the hypnoid state or is that person in the other state?
He is in the hypnoid state. And we
That means
deliberately
healing takes
design,
place there as well.
yeah, we design the couch in a way that the person does not go to sleep and is also not fully awake and attention and concentrated in attention. We want him to relax. That's how the Freudian couch is designed. That we want him to relax but not sleep. The relaxation has to be so high that he goes into that regressed state, that hypnoid state, in which the defenses go down and the unconscious becomes more open, like the state of daydreaming. So we create what is called the frame. We'll come to it when we do the technique lectures. That what is the difference between face-to-face therapy, both people sitting on a chair and one person lying down, right? And online, where somebody can switch off the camera. Three are very different. So when we do the technique lectures of how to do the therapy, we'll go into it. Why the couch? Why the same place, same time every week? Right? Why the therapist is hidden? Right? What difference does it make? Why the self-revelation of the patient, but no revelation from the therapist? So you are right. We deliberately induce the hypnoid state, which is near to the hypnotic state, right? To induce regression so as to open up the unconscious and lower the defenses. This is the point at which Jung had a problem with Freud. That Jung was not so much in favor of working in the regressed state. So Jung changed Freud's technique and he went on face-to-face therapy. He dispensed with the couch. But even today in Freudian, Kleinian, Bionian, essentially it is still couch.
In technique, sir, please do also take up the resistance to the couch. Many patients, they keep on refusing, uh, uh, considering the psychological component of defense.
Correct. So as we said the other day, who is a patient of psychoanalysis and who is not? So one of the criteria is, can the patient be on the couch comfortable? If just being there is so uncomfortable, so anxiety provoking, then one way out is to do it face to face for a few days with a very clear mention that after you get comfortable, we'll go to the couch. Right? In my initial days, I lost a few patients, and some of them uh, were because of a underlying homosexual dynamic. And one of the most threatening things for them is to have a male therapist behind the couch, invisible to them. It gives rise to a lot of difficult fantasies. So I did not have knowledge at that time that this can be so. And then my supervisor told me at that time, if you find this kind of a case history, interpret it. Because uninterpreted, it will create such affective situation that the person will exit therapy. And I lost a couple of patients on that count. Yeah,
Mostly, sir, Oedipus is at play.
yeah. But because of the bisexual, homosexual component, it is the uh, double Oedipus,
Double Oedipus.
double Oedipus which is at play.
Also, I feel that some resistance to couch can be because of the cultural, socio-cultural milieu.
Correct.
Because this whole thing originated in Europe. And when we bring it here in our cultural context, I think people are not so generally also comfortable with certain way of sitting and
Very, very true. This is more true in India because let's say there is a male therapist and a female patient and the door is closed. And the female patient has to be on the couch. And that's a very extremely awkward thing for many women. It's also a gender issue. They may not be so uncomfortable with a woman therapist as with a male therapist. And some may be uncomfortable with both of them. They just are not comfortable with being uh, on the couch in front of anybody. So it's true, it's a cultural issue also.
But isn't it, sir, that anything, let it be cultural, conditional learning, whatever it is, regard, uh, the dynamic of respect, but unconscious may it is the same phenomena, which is being sublimated by superego. Not everybody is so focused for it, and many of people have this. They keep on getting up in between the session also. They'll sit whenever difficult topics are coming up. They would sit. Some people would stand up also.
Hmm.
So once on the Freudian couch, we give a lot of weightage to these things. We
Yes,
see it from the light of cultural and social context, individual context, but we keep on referring to the internal dynamics also of the unconscious.
correct. Because this is a very important point in technique. What if the person gets up in the middle of the session and sits on the couch? He says, I can't lie down. So we have to bring it into the discussion that why just lying down is so uncomfortable. In fact, it should be restful. I mean, lying down any point is more restful than sitting. So why are the tables turned? Why the restful has become unrestful? So obviously something is moving inside, and that has to be brought up and discussed. And we have to be very empathic to the person, that not to worry about it. Whenever it comes up, just let me know, or sit up for some time and then lie down again, and we discuss it and we solve it. And after some sitting ups, the problem will go. Obviously, we are referring to group 3 patients. The other day we talked about the group 3 patients who require a lot of holding. Huh.
In fact, what I remember having read was that when a person actually is capable of free associating, the analysis nearly comes to the end. Because it is so difficult initially to free associate.
Correct. Correct. So this raises a very important question. Uh, What is the degree of free in the free association? And this is one way to check it is to use Lacan's technique of articulation of desire. Like if we go into the articulation of desire, we can see this in work at work. In fact, I tried this in my own therapy, and my therapist was anxious that I am going crazy because what happens is, so he actually stopped me, which he should not have, but he did it from a good intention. But what I was trying to do was to deepen the free association. So what happens is when you get into articulation of desire, so one can ask the patient, what are your desires? Would you like to articulate it? And Lacan's idea is articulate to exhaustion. Right? Fulfillment may not be a choice for us, but we can articulate it so well that in a way its power is exhausted. Right? Now, I started free association on my desires. So initially, I started talking about everyday desires. I want a good job, I want money, I want car, and I want a good woman, and I want fame, and I want to be on the screen, and so on. And then the unconscious desires started coming up as you go deeper. So first layer is conscious desires, then the unconscious desires. And at some point, when you start articulating, you can even go to the extent of a broken language, where the syntax breaks, the grammar breaks, and the free association actually becomes psychotic. It's unanchored, right? And it actually becomes huh?
Sorry, unhinged.
Correct,
I
unhinged.
wanted to
Unhinged.
suggest a word.
Correct.
Sorry.
That's the right word, unhinged. So it loses that hinge, that anchor, and one actually appears like psychotic. So I was just touching upon that, and my therapist thought I was going from a neurotic state to a psychotic state, and he stopped it. So, but uh, ideally, if both are comfortable and we are not dealing with a uh, person with psychotic framework, then this is a good technique of uh, making the free association so free that it starts unhinging itself from all the shackles, including finally the shackles of the language. So this can be one way of practicing really how free the free association is. Is hysteria a psychosis? It's a very interesting question because some of the things that the word hysteria covers are called psychosis today. And Freud made a very important comment later on that in our dreams we are all psychotic every day. So, should we take a break for some time? 5 minutes to have a cup of tea?
Sure, sir.